I demand to see the HOA approval paperwork! This unauthorized access will result in fines!
I thought the delay at the gate was just routine security, until an HOA badge tried to overrule armed MPs. The line crawled toward the base entrance, engines idling, radios low, everyone doing the usual wait. I was there for contracted maintenance work tied to a housing development just outside the fence, something I'd done plenty of times before. The morning felt normal until I noticed a woman standing between cars instead of inside one. She wore an HOA badge on a lanyard and held a clipboard like it was official gear, pacing as if she owned the lane. She was stopping drivers before they reached the sentry booth, telling them they were early or late based on approved entry times. A guy 2 cars up rolled his window down, confused, while she pointed back toward the road and told him to wait. That alone caught my attention, but what really changed the mood was how the MPs reacted. They didn't shout or rush, but I saw them straighten, eyes tracking her movements instead of scanning IDs. One MP raised a hand to pause the line and stepped out just enough to get a clear look. He asked her to return to her vehicle and let the gate handle processing. His voice was steady, the kind you hear from someone who's been trained not to escalate. She answered back immediately, explaining that the HOA required staggered departures and that residents were out of compliance. The MP listened without interrupting, which only seemed to encourage her. Traffic stalled behind us as another MP moved closer, positioning himself between her and the booth. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Gate operations slowed, then stopped completely, and radios chirped as information passed along. She kept talking louder now, pointing at license plates and mentioning reports. From my seat, it was clear she thought attention meant authority. The MPs stayed calm, hands visible, posture controlled. One of them told everyone to remain in their vehicles while they addressed the disruption. That instruction landed heavy. This wasn't about HOA schedules anymore. This was about base security. She acknowledged the order but didn't move, continuing to explain agreements and permissions like she could talk her way through armed protocol. I watched another MP step out from the shaded booth area, eyes on her, while the first one repeated the direction to clear the lane. She finally paused, looking around at the stopped cars, the uniforms, the weapons she hadn't seemed to notice before. For a second, nobody spoke. The power in the space had shifted, and even she seemed to feel it. The MP nearest her pointed back toward her car and told her to wait there while they sorted things out. She hesitated, clutching the clipboard, clearly weighing whether to push again. Behind me, engines shut off and the whole line went quiet. Whatever happened next wasn't going to be a warning or a wave-through. The gate had locked into security mode, and she was now the problem being handled. An MP glanced down the line and signaled another guard to the far side, tightening the perimeter without saying a word. She tried to laugh it off, saying this was getting blown out of proportion, but nobody laughed back. The base flag snapped in the wind above the booth, and the moment stretched longer than it should have. I realized then this wasn't just a delay anymore. It was an incident forming, the kind that gets names and timestamps attached. As the radios clicked again and boots shifted on pavement, it was obvious the next step would come from higher up the chain, not from her clipboard. Everyone waited, engines silent, while the gate held steady and the situation edged closer to whatever authority would arrive next. The MP stepped forward far enough that his boots were clearly in front of the stop line, one hand raised toward the cars and the other resting near his vest. He told everyone to remain inside their vehicles and follow base entry protocol only. The tone wasn't loud or aggressive, just firm and practiced, the kind that assumes compliance because it's been earned. Engines idled, windows stayed up, and the line settled into a quiet that felt heavier than before. Whatever flexibility had existed a moment earlier disappeared with that instruction. He turned to the woman with the HOA badge and told her the gate was federal property under military jurisdiction. He didn't rush the words and he didn't dress them up. He explained that once vehicles entered the controlled approach, all movement and communication were governed by base security procedures. Another MP shifted to his side, not crowding her, just reinforcing the boundary. The space around her tightened without anyone laying a hand on her. She nodded while he spoke, eyes fixed on his face, like she was listening carefully. Then she said she understood but needed to clarify that HOA rules still applied to residents, even here. She gestured back toward the road, explaining that departure times were staggered to reduce congestion and protect community assets. The MP didn't interrupt, which she seemed to take as permission to keep going. Her voice carried across the stopped cars, confident and rehearsed. The MP waited until she finished, then repeated that base protocol overrode private agreements. He said it plainly, adding that civilians were not authorized to direct traffic or delay access at a military installation. Another MP behind him checked the mirrors of the nearest car, scanning for movement, while a third remained at the booth, eyes flicking between the line and the woman. The checkpoint had shifted from processing to control and everyone could feel it. She replied that residents had signed binding documents and that the HOA was responsible for compliance. The MP told her those documents had no standing at the gate. He asked her to return to her vehicle and allow the MPs to resume operations. That was the first clear order directed solely at her, and it landed differently. A couple of drivers leaned forward in their seats, watching through windshields like they didn't want to miss what came next. She hesitated, then said she wasn't interfering, just coordinating. The MP corrected her, saying coordination was handled by base personnel only. He kept his hands visible, posture relaxed, but his stance didn't leave room for negotiation. A radio crackled behind him, and he responded with a short acknowledgement without taking his eyes off her. The environment was changing in small, deliberate ways. She acknowledged hearing him again, then added that she still needed to document which vehicles left outside approved windows. The MP shook his head once and told her that documentation could not occur here. He pointed back toward her car, indicating where she needed to stand if she wasn't leaving. The line of cars remained frozen, a silent audience to a boundary being drawn. Another MP stepped closer to the lane she'd been standing in, blocking it with his body. The movement was subtle but effective. She glanced at him, then back at the first MP, her confidence starting to thin. She tried to pivot, saying she'd step aside after finishing one note. The MP cut that off, repeating the instruction to return to her vehicle now. She looked down at her clipboard, then up at the uniforms, clearly weighing whether to comply or push again. The MP didn't fill the silence. He waited, letting the order stand on its own. Engines hummed, the flag above the booth snapped in the breeze, and the stillness stretched. From where I sat, it was obvious the line had been crossed, even if she hadn't accepted it yet. Finally, she said she understood the instruction, but added that the HOA would follow up. The MP acknowledged the statement and told her to move. She took a half step back, not fully complying, not fully resisting either. The checkpoint remained locked down, radios active, eyes trained on her. Whatever happened next wasn't going to be settled with explanations. The authority boundary had been stated clearly, and the next response would depend entirely on whether she respected it. I watched her take 2 quick steps forward, crossing the painted line like it didn't mean anything. She lifted her clipboard and waved at the driver in the next lane, telling him to stop before reaching the booth. The guy froze, halfway rolling, clearly confused about who he was supposed to listen to. That single motion snapped the whole checkpoint out of routine and into something tighter. An MP immediately raised his hand toward the lane she'd just interrupted, signaling a hard stop. Processing shut down on the spot, ID still half extended through windows. Another MP stepped laterally, positioning himself between her and the vehicle lanes, not touching her, just reclaiming space. The calm rhythm of cars inching forward vanished, replaced by engines idling and radios chirping. She didn't back off. Instead, she leaned toward the stopped driver and said HOA documentation had to be verified before anyone accessed the base. Her voice carried, sharp enough to cut through the hum of engines. She said it like it was policy everyone should already know. The driver glanced between her badge and the MP's, eyes wide, hands still on the wheel. The first MP told her to step back immediately. His tone stayed level, but the words landed heavier this time. She replied that she was preventing unauthorized entry, which was her responsibility as a board member. That's when I saw the shift happen. The MP stopped watching the cars and focused entirely on her, shoulders squared, attention locked. One of them keyed his radio and spoke quietly, using short phrases that didn't sound optional. The booth agent slid his window closed and stepped out, joining the others without any hurry. Lanes that had been moving minutes earlier were now completely static. Whatever timeline the checkpoint had been on no longer mattered. She tried to justify herself by holding up a packet of papers, flipping pages like proof would change jurisdiction. She said residents were required to comply with exit approvals and that the HOA had an agreement with the installation. Nobody argued the claim. The silence from the MPs felt deliberate, like they were letting her dig a deeper hole without help. The supervising MP took a step forward and told her she was interfering with controlled access to a military base. He instructed her to return to her vehicle immediately and keep her hands visible. That instruction came with a different weight than before. A second MP shifted closer to her flank, closing off the lane she'd been standing in. She hesitated again, looking around like she expected backup from the line of cars. Instead, driver stared straight ahead, suddenly very interested in dashboards and mirrors. Someone behind me cracked their window an inch, then closed it when an MP glanced over. The environment felt sealed, like everything outside the gate had dropped away. She said she needed the driver's name and unit sponsor before allowing him to proceed. The supervising MP cut her off and repeated the order, this time adding that failure to comply would escalate the situation. His hand rested near his radio, not threatening, just ready. The words escalation hung there, heavy and unmistakable. Another MP walked over to the stopped driver and instructed him to remain in place until told otherwise. The driver nodded quickly, relieved to have clarity, even if it meant waiting longer. The convoy behind him was locked in, no room to maneuver. Control of movement had fully shifted away from her. She finally stepped back a half pace, still talking, still explaining HOA authority like volume could substitute for permission. The MPs didn't respond verbally. They watched her, measured and alert, as one of them radioed for a supervisor from inside the perimeter. That was the moment it became obvious this wasn't about traffic anymore. I felt the whole line seize up the second the barrier arms stopped moving. Brake lights stacked all the way back toward the access road, and engines settled into that uneasy idle that means nobody's going anywhere. An MP stepped out of the booth and motioned for the next two lanes to hold, palms down, calm but final. The casual chatter on open windows died fast, replaced by the scratch of radios and the thump of doors closing. One of the MPs turned slightly away from us and keyed his shoulder mic, speaking low and clipped. I caught enough to know it wasn't routine anymore. He used words like civilian interference and access control, the kind of phrases that don't get tossed around unless something's off script. Another MP walked to the rear of the gatehouse and pulled a retractable barrier across a service lane, physically shrinking the space cars could move. Karen kept talking through all of it. She stood near the lane line, still explaining HOA exit approvals like she was giving a presentation at a board meeting. She didn't notice the way the posture of the MPs changed, how their feet angled outward and their attention widened. Her voice stayed steady, confident, completely missing the shift happening around her. Traffic behind me started stacking tighter. A contractor 2 cars back tried to reverse and got waved down immediately. An MP pointed and shook his head once, firm, no drama. The message was clear, stay put. Whatever schedule anyone had was officially wrecked, and that consequence landed the moment the gate locked down. Another radio call went out, this one louder, carried on an external speaker for coordination. I heard a call sign and a request for a supervisor to respond to the primary gate. That was new. Supervisors don't roll unless something needs authority beyond the booth. Karen kept gesturing with her clipboard, still focused on drivers instead of the uniformed people managing the scene. A third MP repositioned to the front of her car, blocking it in so it couldn't pull forward or back. He didn't touch the hood or raise his voice. He just stood there, hands visible, body squared. That physical placement said more than words. Control of movement had shifted entirely to them. Drivers started pulling phones out, then thought better of it when an MP glanced down the line. Screens went dark. Windows rolled up. The energy changed from annoyed to cautious in about 30 seconds. Nobody wanted to be the next variable added to whatever problem was unfolding. Karen laughed once, sharp and quick, like she assumed this was all overkill. She said she was just trying to keep things orderly. No one responded. An MP walked past her and placed a small cone behind the lead vehicle, marking a temporary stop point. Procedure was taking over piece by piece. I noticed the gate camera swivel slightly, tracking the lane she'd interfered with. That detail mattered. Cameras don't move unless someone inside is actively monitoring. Whatever report got called in was now being watched, logged, and time-stamped. Karen didn't look up once. When the supervisor vehicle finally appeared inside the perimeter, lights not flashing but unmistakable, the MP straightened even more. One pointed toward Karen without drama. She was still mid-sentence, still explaining bylaws, completely unaware she'd triggered a response meant for actual threats. Behind the booth, an interior door opened, and another uniform joined the cluster, eyes already on her. A log clipboard appeared in an MP's hands, different from hers, thicker, official. He began writing without looking up, anchoring the moment in ink. Karen finally paused, sensing something was off, but the supervisor hadn't spoken yet, and the silence stretched long enough to make everyone wait. No one told her what came next. Karen didn't back off when she realized everyone was watching. If anything, she leaned into it. She raised her voice enough that it carried down the stopped lanes, sharp and rehearsed, the tone of someone used to running meetings. She warned drivers that leaving without HOA clearance could result in fines, written reports, and future access restrictions. A couple of heads turned in cars ahead of me, people trying to figure out if she was serious or just blowing smoke. One MP shifted position immediately, stepping closer to her line of sight while another moved behind her vehicle. The change was subtle but deliberate, the kind of movement meant to box in a situation without making a scene. Karen kept talking anyway, waving her clipboard for emphasis like it was a badge that mattered here. She claimed the association had standing agreements that outranked local authority, stressing those last words as if that settled it. A driver in the next lane cracked his window and asked if we were still allowed to proceed when instructed by the gate. An MP answered before Karen could jump in, telling him to remain stopped until directed by base personnel. The exchange was calm, professional, and final. Karen tried to talk over it, but nobody looked at her. Phones started coming out despite earlier caution. I saw at least 3 people lift them just high enough to catch audio and movement. An MP noticed and didn't react, which told me recording wasn't the priority anymore. Containment was. Another uniform stepped into the booth and shut the sliding window, isolating communications inside. That cut Karen out completely from whatever coordination was happening. She pivoted toward the cars again and repeated her warning, louder this time, adding that non-compliance would be documented by the HOA. That's when a supervising MP raised a hand, not toward her, but toward the lane. The signal froze everything. He didn't speak yet, but his presence alone shifted the balance. Karen's words hung in the air without landing anywhere. The supervisor spoke briefly to one of the gate MPs, pointing at the clipboard Karen was holding. The MP nodded and took 2 steps forward, now standing between her and the drivers she'd been addressing. That physical separation mattered. She tried to angle around him, but he adjusted smoothly, never touching her, just occupying the space she wanted. Karen snapped that she was authorized to be there and demanded her voice be heard. The supervisor finally addressed her, telling her to lower her volume and step back from the lanes. His tone wasn't angry, just controlled, like he'd done this exact thing before. She argued that residents needed to understand consequences. He replied that enforcement discussions were not appropriate at a secured gate. That's when she made her biggest mistake. She said the HOA's agreements were above local authority and recognized by federal partners. The supervisor's expression didn't change, but another MP immediately turned and spoke into his radio, clearly repeating that claim. Documentation was escalating in real time. Drivers who'd been half listening before were now fully locked in. You could feel it. Engines idled, radios went silent, and everyone waited. Karen noticed the attention and seemed energized by it, doubling down with a final warning about reports being filed. No one responded. 2 MPs repositioned again, one moving closer to her passenger door, the other toward the front of her car. She was effectively boxed in without realizing it. The supervisor nodded once toward the inspection area beyond the gate, not issuing an order yet, just marking a future move. Karen finally paused, sensing resistance but not understanding its scope. She asked who she needed to speak to in charge. The supervisor told her she was already speaking to the appropriate authority. That answer landed hard. She opened her mouth to respond, but another MP stepped up with a notepad and asked for her identification. The line went dead quiet, and nobody knew what was about to happen next. The shift happened the second the supervising MP stepped fully into the lane. You could tell by how everyone else adjusted without being told. 2 MPs straightened their posture, another angled his body to block foot traffic, and the gate arms stayed locked in place. The supervisor looked at Karen once, then at the clipboard, then back at her face like he was lining up facts before speaking. When he told her to return to her vehicle immediately, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was clipped, procedural, and final. Karen didn't move. She squared her shoulders instead and said she still had enforcement duties to complete before anyone left the community. That line landed flat. Nobody reacted except the supervisor, who tilted his head slightly and repeated the order, slower this time. He added that she was interfering with base access operations and needed to comply now. A couple of drivers rolled their windows up, sensing the temperature drop. She waved the clipboard again and said she was authorized by the HOA to be there. The supervisor didn't argue the point. He took half a step back and raised 2 fingers behind his shoulder, a small signal I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been watching closely. One MP immediately moved toward a side control panel near the booth, while another repositioned near the secondary inspection lane. That's when it hit me this was no longer a conversation. The supervisor told Karen this was her final instruction to return to her car. She shook her head and said she needed his badge number for her report. Instead of answering, he turned slightly and spoke into his radio, calm and precise. requesting secondary security procedures for a non-compliant civilian obstructing entry. The word non-compliant carried weight. You could feel it ripple through the line. An MP approached Karen from the side and gestured toward her car door, not touching her, just indicating direction. She argued that she hadn't broken any laws and said she was protecting residents. The MP responded that this wasn't a debate and repeated the direction. Behind them, another uniform unlocked a gate separating the main lanes from the inspection area. Traffic behind me began to reverse slowly under direction, clearing space. That movement changed everything. What had been a stalled inconvenience turned into an active security response. Karen noticed the cars shifting and looked around, clearly surprised the situation was growing instead of resolving. She raised her voice again, saying this was unnecessary and disruptive. The supervisor stepped closer, reducing the distance between them. He told her that refusing a lawful order at a military installation carried consequences and that she needed to comply now. His tone stayed even but the language sharpened. Karen said she wasn't refusing, just finishing her task. That answer didn't help her. Another MP arrived carrying a small binder and stopped next to the supervisor. He didn't open it yet, just held it, waiting. Karen finally turned toward her car but stopped short, asking if she was being detained. The supervisor told her she was being directed to return to her vehicle pending further review. That distinction mattered, but she didn't seem to catch it. She hesitated again, scanning the line of armed MPs, the locked gate, the emptying lanes. The clipboard lowered a few inches. An MP opened her car door for her and stepped back, giving her a clear path without touching her. Everyone waited. Karen climbed into the driver's seat but left the door open, continuing to talk about HOA authority and agreements. The supervisor didn't respond verbally. He nodded once toward the inspection lane, and an MP signaled for her to pull forward. She asked where she was being taken. The answer came clean and short: secondary screening. As she started the engine, another MP photographed the clipboard lying on the passenger seat. Karen noticed and snapped that she didn't consent. Nobody replied. The gate behind her vehicle closed again, sealing her inside the controlled area. The convoy ahead began moving under escort, one vehicle at a time. My line finally rolled forward, slowly, smoothly, like nothing unusual had happened. As I passed, I saw Karen's car idling in the inspection lane, door shut now, MPs positioned on either side. She was still talking through the window but no one appeared to be listening. The supervisor turned away from her and spoke into his radio again, updating status. Whatever came next clearly wasn't about traffic anymore, and Karen still hadn't realized how far out of her depth she'd gone. When Karen was told to pull forward into the controlled inspection area, the mood shifted instantly. The lane narrowed, cones appeared, and two MPs guided her vehicle with hand signals that didn't invite debate. She rolled ahead slow, still talking through the glass, until another MP pointed to a painted stop box and held his palm up. The engine went quiet. Traffic behind us resumed, and the rest of the convoy slid past under watch, leaving her isolated in a space designed to slow things down. An MP approached her driver's window and asked for identification. Karen hesitated, then handed over her license and HOA badge together, like they carried equal weight. The MP took only the license, glanced at the badge without touching it, and stepped back to a small podium. Another MP circled the rear of her car, scanning plates and noting the dashboard. The supervisor stood off to the side, arms relaxed, eyes on the process rather than the person. Questions came next, short and specific. Why she exited her vehicle. Why she directed traffic. Why she ignored repeated instructions. Karen answered fast, leaning on HOA authority and community agreements, saying she believed she was authorized to manage residents. The MP nodded, wrote, and didn't argue. Each response went into a form, not into a conversation. That difference mattered. The supervisor asked if she understood this was a restricted federal installation. Karen said yes. He asked if she understood that interference with gate operations could trigger enforcement actions. She said she thought there were exceptions. He acknowledged the answer and signaled to continue. No raised voices, no lectures, just procedure clicking forward. While one MP continued the interview, another stepped a few yards away and made a call. I couldn't hear the words, but the posture said official business. He referenced the HOA badge, then read from a card, then waited. Karen noticed the call and asked who they were contacting. The response was simple: base security coordination. Her face tightened. Minutes later, the MP returned and confirmed contact with HOA management. He explained that a representative would be notified about a civilian presenting authority claims at a federal gate. Karen tried to clarify, saying she was acting in good faith. The supervisor said that was noted and asked her to remain seated. The location changed again when an MP directed her to shut off the engine and keep her hands visible. That wasn't accusatory, just standard. Another MP repositioned near the front bumper. The inspection area felt smaller now, defined by people instead of paint. As the convoy cleared, the gate reopened in stages. Each vehicle passed smoothly, checked and waved through. The system had adjusted around the disruption, minimizing impact. Karen watched it happen, the flow returning without her input. She tapped the steering wheel, waiting. The supervisor returned and explained that her information would be forwarded for review, and that any further action would be determined by command. He didn't say charges or consequences, just review. Karen asked if she was free to leave. He said not yet. A final note was added to the form, then the clipboard closed. The MP handed her license back but kept the HOA badge where it was, untouched on the seat. The supervisor nodded toward the radio again, updating status. Whatever decision came next was moving up a chain she didn't control, and the inspection area stayed quiet, holding her there while the base kept running. The MP stepped closer and lowered his voice, not for drama but clarity. He explained that federal obstruction statutes cover interference with gate operations, traffic control, and personnel safety. He said the base runs under standing security orders, and civilians don't get carve-outs because they feel responsible. Karen nodded too fast, smiling like she'd heard something familiar. The supervisor didn't argue. He just pointed to the cones and cameras and said those procedures exist to keep everyone alive. The power line shifted there, away from opinions and into rules that don't bend. Karen tried to pivot, saying she was helping maintain order while things were chaotic. She talked about residents panicking and claimed she was preventing accidents. The MP acknowledged the concern and replied that only authorized personnel manage flow on federal property. He asked if she understood that directing vehicles without permission creates risk. She hesitated, then said she thought coordination was implied. He marked something on the form, slow and deliberate, and told her intent doesn't override statute. That's when her confidence started leaking out. Her voice dropped a notch and she stopped scanning the line behind her. An MP adjusted his body position, standing square to her door, blocking any casual exit. The supervisor explained that the conversation was being recorded through standard reporting channels, including timestamps and badge numbers. Karen glanced at the camera pole she'd ignored earlier. She asked if this meant a citation. The answer was measured: documentation first, decisions later. That delay hit harder than a threat, because it meant this wasn't ending at the gate. The MP went on to outline base security statutes, explaining how even brief disruptions get logged when they affect access control. He wasn't stern, just precise, like reading weather. Karen tried again to reframe herself as a volunteer asset. The supervisor stopped that gently, saying misrepresentation of authority creates its own problem. Another MP arrived with a tablet and synced notes. Karen's shoulders slumped as she realized multiple systems were now involved, none of which reported back to her board. The location shifted one last time when the supervisor stepped away to confer with base operations. Karen stayed seated, hands folded, eyes fixed forward. Traffic noise faded as the gate resumed normal rhythm elsewhere. An MP returned and explained that her statements would be attached to the incident report. She asked if she should call someone. He said her organization had already been notified. The realization finally landed. Her badge meant nothing here, and the paper trail would outlast the morning. She asked if this would delay her entry, and the answer was a calm yes. That was the clearest shift yet. The MP explained release would depend on command review, not negotiation. Karen exhaled, looking past the windshield at nothing. The system had taken over and she finally saw it. An MP told her to remain parked until released, and the tone left no room for debate. She nodded, quieter now, absorbing that the process had its own clock. The supervisor returned, confirming next steps without promising outcomes. As our convoy cleared the gate, I watched her in the mirror, still waiting. Whatever came next would come later, off-site, and with consequences she couldn't manage. The gate closed behind us and the base kept moving. The supervisor came back with a final instruction and delivered it like it was routine, because for him it was. Karen was ordered to remain parked in the controlled area until base operations cleared her. There was no raised voice, no back and forth, just a clear boundary set in plain language. An MP repositioned his vehicle slightly to block her forward line of travel, turning the order into a physical reality. That was the moment it stopped being a conversation and became a condition. Gate operations restarted almost immediately once she was contained. The lane beside us opened, cones shifted, and another MP waved the next truck through with practiced efficiency. Radios crackled with short confirmations, and the line that had stalled started moving again. Karen watched this happen from her driver's seat, hands still on the wheel, realizing traffic would flow just fine without her input. The system didn't pause for explanations. One of the MPs approached her window with a clipboard that looked nothing like her HOA one. He explained she was being issued a formal warning for interference with base entry procedures. The wording was precise, neutral, and clearly rehearsed. She tried to ask what that meant for her personally, but he told her the warning would be logged and reviewed by command staff. No promises, no threats, just process. He asked her to confirm her information and sign acknowledgement, not admission. As she signed, another MP logged the incident into a tablet, syncing timestamps with the earlier radio call. I could see the chain clicking together in real time. Karen's posture shifted again, shoulders pulled in, voice barely audible when she asked how long she'd be there. The answer was simple, until released. That uncertainty seemed to hit harder than any fine she'd threatened earlier. The power shift became obvious when the supervising MP turned away from her and focused back on the gate. His attention moved where it mattered, and she was no longer the priority. Vehicles continued through ID checks, mirrors inspected, passes scanned, all smooth and steady. Our convoy rolled forward, and no one mentioned her again over the radio. The disruption had been isolated and neutralized. Karen sat alone in the controlled area as traffic passed a few yards away. She wasn't detained in cuffs or surrounded dramatically, she was simply removed from relevance. That quiet exclusion felt intentional, like letting the process speak for itself. An MP stayed within sight, not looming, just present enough to enforce compliance if needed. She didn't test it. As we cleared the gate, I caught a last glance in my side mirror. Karen was still parked, staring ahead, her HOA badge resting uselessly on the dashboard. The gate arm lifted and dropped behind us, resetting the boundary she tried to cross. Whatever consequences came next wouldn't happen here, and that seemed to sink in. The final radio update came through as we merged onto the access road. Gate operations were fully resumed, no delays reported. The incident number was confirmed, and the channel moved on to the next task. No one celebrated, no one commented. It was just another resolved issue in a long shift. Driving deeper onto base property, the contrast felt sharp. Inside the perimeter, everything ran on protocol, not personality. Karen's authority had evaporated the moment she stepped into that space, and the system corrected the problem without drama. I knew the paperwork would travel further than we could see, and that realization hadn't fully reached her yet. The gate disappeared behind a curve, and the next escalation was already set in motion somewhere else. The notice showed up 2 days later in everyone's inbox, stamped with the HOA logo and a tone that screamed damage control. It said the association did not authorize, endorse, or condone any actions taken at the base gate. That line alone told me lawyers had already gotten involved. By the afternoon, a follow-up message clarified that all enforcement authority was suspended pending review. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew exactly who it was about. I heard from a neighbor that she'd been called into a closed session the same morning. Her HOA badge disappeared from public meetings, and her email signature changed overnight. Another notice went out explaining that compliance roles were being reassigned to management professionals. That was the polite way of saying she was done. Around the neighborhood, the story traveled faster than the official updates. People compared screenshots, traded secondhand details, and filled in the blanks. What stuck wasn't the delay, but the visual of her arguing past armed MPs like rules were negotiable. She didn't push back publicly after that. Her car stopped appearing near entrances, and her posts on the HOA forum went quiet. When someone asked about the gate incident, a board member replied with a single line about jurisdiction limits. That answer ended the discussion fast. For me, the takeaway sharpened every time I passed the base entrance for work. The guard procedures never changed and the chain of command stayed clear. What changed was how small HOA authority looked once it hit a hard boundary. There was no appeal, no workaround, and no special status to hide behind. The system corrected the behavior without raising its voice. I later learned the warning stayed on file, tied to her name, not the HOA. That distinction mattered more than any fine she'd threatened. It meant consequences followed the person who crossed the line. Weeks later, the board adopted a policy spelling out where their authority ends in plain language. They cited safety zones and federal property specifically. No one said her name, but it didn't need saying. As for Karen, she kept a low profile and avoided anything that smelled like enforcement. The last I heard, she was focused on landscaping committees and newsletters. That shift spoke louder than any apology could. Still, the tension lingered because everyone knew how close it came to becoming a bigger mess. If she delayed the line longer, the response would have escalated fast. That possibility sat there unspoken whenever the topic came up. Every morning drive past the gate felt like a reminder written in concrete and steel. Rules only matter where they're allowed to exist. Beyond that point, authority belongs to whoever guards the line. The next escalation wouldn't come from a clipboard, but from whether people remembered that lesson. For now, things were quiet, which felt temporary rather than resolved. All it would take was one more person forgetting where the line actually sits. That thought followed me as the base gate receded in the mirror again. I knew the systems would respond if tested, but not without cost. And somewhere outside the gate, those costs were still being calculated. The paperwork would finish its slow crawl through offices that didn't care about titles. Decisions would be made quietly, then enforced without ceremony. That silence was the real consequence she hadn't planned for. It stripped away the audience and left only outcomes. Nothing about that felt finished yet. It just felt paused, waiting for whatever lesson came next. When it did, it wouldn't announce itself ahead of time. That's how boundaries really work. They hold until someone tests them, and then the response arrives calmly, professionally, and with consequences that keep moving long after the moment everyone thought was the end, even as attention fades and memory starts to blur for most people involved.
Alright, now I want to hear from you. Do you think she was completely out of the line here? Or do you believe authority sometimes goes too far? Drop your take in comments, I read every single one.